How you doing? My name is Anthony Muñoz. I'm joining you guys by way of DPR Construction in California, United States of America. Today I really want to talk on how simple acts of collaboration can produce greater returns. In one instance, how 19 minutes can produce $2.4 million in returns to an owner. It's these simple acts of collaboration that not only build great returns, but build great relationships. So there's a stigma associated with collaboration that we as an industry have resisted going lean. However, we've accepted the very real risks of failing together. Working together, we could build each other stronger and get across that finish line faster. So why not do it? There's a passion inside of me that's a story. And there's a story inside of each of you that if you share it with your neighbor, you can help each other. So I want to say thank you for inviting me here to share our story. I think it's going to go a long ways. Now, as Dean has already established with photos tell a great story of their own. So I thought this photo here was appropriate. Now, the image that you see on your left-hand side is one of the most recognizable images of the last century. It was 1932, Rockefeller Center, just some crazy cowboys eating lunch on a beam. Now, the one on the right-hand side, you're probably less familiar with. That was taken in 2017 in a skyscraper in Chicago, equally as cold as Denmark, in homage to the original photo. Now, when I look at that photo, it tells a story. One, times have changed, obviously. But if I was going to make some assumptions, I would say that the photo on the right took a lot longer to stage, mostly because of safety concerns, right? We got a lot smarter as it pertains to safety. We take a lot more precautions. So I can imagine that was probably a lot of harnesses and a lot of time to get it there, which is pretty parallel to our industry as a whole. Times have changed. We've become smarter. We've actually overcomplicated processes, and we're taking longer to do things. You also note that the photo on the right-hand side is of lesser quality, interestingly enough. But again, it's very telling of our industry today. Not only are we taking longer, but maybe we're not producing as great of a product. Maybe photos don't do it for you. Maybe that's too fluffy. So let's look at the numbers. In the last year alone, an overwhelming amount of projects were delivered late, 70%, even more over budget. And why is that? Well, mostly because of productivity. We're taking longer to do the same thing, just like that photo would tell you. Now, maybe you don't like pie. I love pie, but you don't like pie charts. I'll give you a line chart. In comparison to manufacturing, construction has been in a constant decline since before the 60s, 60s being where this study originated. Why is that? We're BIMing now, virtual design and construction. We're so smart. How many PhD students do we say we had here in this group? How many degrees do we have amongst us? But we're so smart, we're dumbing ourselves down. Now, I wanted to share the graph on the right-hand side. It shows the primary contributors to this lack of productivity as a measure of how much volume that they're generating. And I took the time to highlight our two countries, the United States, a gross offender, and you see there Denmark. Now, as it pertains to productivity, the United States has something to learn from you guys. And it's not just productivity. You know, I've taken a couple of tours this past week here, and I've seen some of your offices, and I've seen what you're doing. And you're doing some really incredible things, particularly with virtual design and construction, some things that I would ask for you guys to jump up here on the stage and teach me something. But I think we have a lot to learn together. Now, why are we reverting back? Well, it's because we have a combative nature in the construction industry. And what I mean by that, by combative, is it's you versus me. My contract versus your contract. My needs versus your needs. My interests versus your interests. 100 years ago, we didn't necessarily have this. 100 years ago, we had the term master builder. A master builder was a designer and a builder in the same wheelhouse. They had all the expertise right next to them to understand how to build a product better. Now, we consider ourselves to be master builders, but we're not making that connection. So something's got to change. We know that design is hard, construction hard. We have a hard job. We know that traditional delivery methods aren't good enough, and we know that our behaviors need to change. And I really want to focus on that. Our behaviors must change. So what behaviors are we talking about? So first, let's look at the traditional model. Our teams are fragmented. It's you versus I. It's never us. Our processes are linear. They're not dynamic. They don't respond to immediate needs and changes. Our risks and our compensation are managed from our own perspectives. I'm worried about my risks. I'm worried about my compensation. You're worried about your own. And we leave it that way. Our communications parallel that. They're stifled because we do have these barriers amongst us. Our agreements support it in writing, right? They apportion risk to you, not me. They effectively point the finger and type. And our behaviors model this, right? So everything that I just said is the reason that we're responding the way we are responding. So how do we change? Well, integration. Integration is key. Why is that? Well, our teams become collaborative, as do our processes. Our processes become transparent. They're openly communicated. Our risks, our compensation, they are one. We are tied together. If I lose, you lose. If I win, you win, and vice versa. Our communications are everywhere. Everywhere you look, we're telling a story. Our agreements support this, and our behaviors, well, we just go home happy because we're having fun doing what we're doing, and we're doing what we do so well. How do we get there? There's a couple of ways. Now, I showed you that line graph that shows there was a discrepancy versus manufacturing in terms of productivity. So McKinsey would tell you that there's a 50% gap between construction and manufacturing in terms of productivity. So how can we close that gap? Well, there's a couple of ways. One, we can collaborate. We can just work together. No contracts necessary in this instance. We just understand your story and how to respond to it. That will close the gap 8 to 9%. We could focus in design and engineering. I'm going to piggyback the collaboration, and we collaborate in designing engineering, right? We understand what we're building, how we're building, and we design to that. That's another 8 to 10%. We work with the procurement and supply chain. All our vendors, all our partners, they're aligned towards the same ends. Things become streamlined. On-site execution. Because we took the time up front to design a product that was buildable, operable, sustainable, usable, we can execute in the field that much faster. Technology, again, I'm not even going to venture to talk about this. You guys tell me. VDC, amazing things. I'm in awe of what you're doing. But there again, another 14 to 15%. Capability building. Exercise we'll perform a little bit later as well. It's just understanding what you need to get there. Overall, you combine those all together, that's a 48 to 60% improvement. We are only down 50%. We got room to spare. There's a few things we could choose not to do. I don't know why you would, but we could choose not to do them and still be ahead of the game. The question is, why are we not doing this? The deeper question is, how do we do this? Because I believe many of us are intimidated by the task ahead of us. So Dean and his team have established the framework for integration. Now, he's identified the elements of integration. He's identified how they interconnect and why they're necessary. So I'm going to take the rest of my time to explain how they can be put into practice and give some, not key examples, but what I say are easy examples. So I'm going to remind you of what the simple framework looks like. Not that I need to, it's all around you. And hopefully it's going to be in you and your thoughts. I'm going to focus on that top level there. Measurable value, production management, collaboration, and simulation. First, I'm going to go ahead and touch on measurable value, what that means and why it's important. Well, it's how you get team in alignment. It's understand what's important to the client. And in this instance, the client is not the owner. They're only one facet of it. The client is the team. It aligns the team in terms of what's priority. What should we be focusing on? How do we produce value? We measure production universally without fail. That's the one thing that you don't define, you do without fail. And no matter what your value is, no matter what you've defined it to be, you communicate that. You do that visually, you do that verbally, but it should be clear that when you walk into a project team's office, whether it's a trailer or imagine a really big office for 100 so plus people, that it's visible and that you understand that you walk in that door, that means you're subscribing. I'm going to leave you with a key takeaway from each of the respective points that I'm making that I don't want you to walk out the room without. We do this as a team. We measure production without fail. And we make value openly communicated, transparent, visual. We do that through dashboards or other makes and models. Now, what do we measure? Well, I made the parallel. We got any sports fans out there? Sports fans out there? Listen, I've seen you guys watch sports, and I know you're louder than what you're being right now, right? So soccer fans, I'm sure, oh no, football, that's right. Football fans. Well, I'm an American football fan, right? Two sports are very different. In one, you finesse across the field and you strike it into the net. In the other, you run for your life and hope you don't get tackled until you cross the line. See, American football is very sophisticated. Very sophisticated. The answer is you can measure anything. So you've defined value as a team. How do you then measure that? What do you measure it with? Well, there's any number of ideas. I throw out a few. You could measure the number of change orders due to rework, or number of RFIs due to bad design, or number of systems that are prefabricated. You guys should be telling me. These are suggestions. Some things that we universally measure, I've already mentioned, productivity. We all measure schedule, right? And we all measure cost. We just may do that a little bit differently. Ultimately, it's up to you to make that target. It's up to the team to define that target. Are you playing football or are you playing American football? I'd venture to say you'd want to stick with football because you don't want to run for your life every day, not in the project setting. Production management. I can't drill this down enough, and some stories I'll share a little bit later are going to reemphasize it. Why and what do we need to do? Well, we need to plan as a team. The concrete guy's not planning just for the concrete guy. The concrete guy's planning in conjunction with the soils guy who's excavating for his footings, right? And the rebar guy. We're planning together in the same space. And why is that? So that we have a plan that's fluid. It flows for all of us. It supports the big picture, not just the minutia, not just your perspective. It helps develop the plan. And what's really important is that once you develop that plan, is you're constantly monitoring the plan. You're huddling up every day to understand what commitments you made, which you didn't, and what you do or what you need to do to recover. You can't do that without working as a team. Next, collaboration and co-location. It's what facilitates working as a team. In fact, when you're in the same room, you can't help but work as a team because you hear and you're privy to every conversation that's happening 5 feet next to you. There are many benefits of it. Some are obvious, some maybe not. So why do we do this? Well, it reduces time to make informed decisions. How does it happen? Well, again, you hear everything that's going on, so you get information constantly. It's dynamic. It helps to improve creativity. Why? Because if a problem presents, it presents at its seed, at its foundation. You're afforded more time to come up with better solutions, and you also have a greater perspective because there's more people in the room. It makes work visible. It strengthens relationships. I had said before, you fail, I fail. You win, I win. You're going to want to win together. You're going to support each other. And in supporting each other, you're also supporting your universal communal decisions that you make as a team. And it makes more visible. It's right there. You're in the trenches. You see it every day. You can't avoid it. Which is our last item, our last enabler, visualization and simulation. Now, I've told you several times, you guys do this far superior than us. So I'm not going to wow you with photos because they're probably nothing to what you can show me. I look forward to you guys showing me something in the future. But why do we do this? Well, as we've illustrated in some of the photos before in Dean's conversation, it empowers the team to make decisions by replicating a real-world experience to the best of our ability within a computer or whatever our tool might be to experiment. And we experiment without the risk of great failure in the model, and it allows us to generate rapid feedback. We understand the variables, what's changing and how we might need to respond, again, without the time and or great dollar value risk associated with it. And that's valuable. And using the model the way we can, leveraging it, can help us support what we've defined as value at the forefront. Now, I've touched on each of the four enablers, and I don't think you would argue when I say that nothing I just said is a novel idea. Nothing. The novel idea, and I think you may have seen it as we are going through and I was bringing out some of the key points, is that they're all interconnected. Working as a team, making things visual, right? Supporting the team in what they're doing. That's the novel idea. We do each of these four things very well. What we don't do is make them work in harmony. We don't leverage each of the enablers to complement the next, to get the most out of what we're already doing. And that's what true integration looks like. Now, to support what it actually looks like, I want to tell two stories of my experiences. The first is a Southern California hospital project, $42 million, 13-month, 27,000 square foot expansion to an existing hospital that housed imaging equipment for heart surgeries. It created a magnet service for this local facility. Now, this project was a true IPD project, meaning that it had an integrated form of agreement. We had 9 total partners, and to start the project, we defined what our value looked like. And we did that by utilizing a conditions of satisfaction. Now, I'm not going to read all of them. What I want to do is focus on the 3 that we made a great difference on in the field. And they are deliver on schedule or early, deliver on budget or below, and constantly maintain a positive team environment. This is challenging, and with challenge could come frustration. So maintaining a positive team environment was critical to supporting all of our other 9 conditions of satisfaction. So I don't want to leave that out. Now, one tool that we identified to support these 3 measures was productivity tracking. So each week, our doers, our contractors or installing contractors, were responsible for reporting out to the entire team being the GC, all of the trade partners, the owner, all of the designers, right? Typically, maybe they just report out internally because that's what affects their dollar value. That's what affects their schedule. But no, we've asked them to report to the entire team. And basically what they're reporting out are their original budgets of both rates and dollar values versus their actualized, what we're actually seeing there in the field. And so this became common practice in each of our big room meetings. Big rooms, are you guys familiar with the term big room? Okay, so big room is not unlike this. We've got a large room in whatever office space that we're using. We share our workspace, and you've seen in some of those photos, we meet where we work. There's simply a larger table in the middle of the room, and everything that supports the project lines the walls, just like you see right here. So every week in our big room, with everybody present, we would report this information. And one week, we had a problem. So our drywall and framing contractor, he was doing his weekly report out, and he says, you know, I've got this one issue with top track installation, the top of a wall. He said, my budgeted rate was 6.2 linear feet per hour. I said, okay, well, what's the problem? Well, I'm not getting that. I'm getting 3.6 linear feet per hour. That's a 58% efficiency. That's a problem. And why is it a problem? Because on that one line item, that one of thousands of line items, if we maintained that trend, we are standing to lose about $30,000 on that one line item. Well, let's say that were to domino effect into something greater. 30,000 becomes 50,000. 50,000 becomes 500,000. It's endless because that one partner had thousands of line items and we had 9 partners. Imagine if the same thing happened elsewhere and propagated. So we had this information and we said, we've got to do something. What's wrong? So we looked at the detail. Well, come to find out, our detail wasn't the easiest detail in all applications. And what I mean by that is that when you are attaching the top track to the bottom side of the deck, you have high and low flutes. Well, where you have a high flute where a screw's supposed to go, what do you do? Well, the answer, at least in this detail as it would show, is you create a bridge. You see that right there? It's just a metal strap for something to shoot into. So we are doing double the work just to get a substrate to anchor into. Well, I said, well, that's no good. What can we do? And so we called all the guys, all the brain power. We got out there in the field with all the information that we believed we needed. We huddled about it, and we tried to problem solve. Eventually, we got an answer. We thought we had an answer. And that's because we had the structural engineer right beside us. And he said, well, you know what? I don't need it at that spacing. I just need that capacity of that number of screws. And if it's within this criteria, we're okay. So we said, well, what if we just double up on the low flutes? Does that solve your problem? Yeah, that solves my problem. So we changed our detail, and it so happened that we had the jurisdiction coming in that day. We presented it to him. He agreed, and we were off and running. Now, I didn't give you any timelines, but this entire process, from identification of a problem to getting resolution with the jurisdiction, in California, you might project that takes about a month because the jurisdiction comes every 2 to 3 weeks. Okay? On this project, it took less than 3 hours. And within 3 hours, we were moving in the field, applying this new detail. Now, we didn't get the update till the next week. We had some smiles out in the field, so we knew things were getting better. But the following week, we had our big room meeting, and we reported out. I want to remind you what we were trending at before, 3.6 linear feet per hour. Well, with our new detail in place, we saw 175% improvement, 9.9 linear feet per hour. That's greater than we originally projected or budgeted. On that line item alone, we saw a $60,000 savings. Now, $60,000 isn't true magnitude of the switch because we were 30,000 in the black or in the red previously, right? So that's a $90,000 improvement for 3 hours. It's pretty great. The end of this project was an overwhelming success. I said 13 months original schedule. We did it in 12. We turned over $2.1 million back to the owner. $500,000 of that was because of productivity savings, not unlike what I just showed you. This wasn't an isolated instance. We did this week in, week out with all of our partners. You know, there were a couple of partners that joined us for the first time on this integrated project, and they were weary, not unlike many of you guys are. And they didn't want to open their books, but they had to open their books. That was the commitment that they made. And when they did, they realized why. Because if they didn't have the answer, maybe someone else did. And collectively, we saw a great enhancement to our fees. We shared in some of those savings. Now, money talks. They want to do this on every project. I want to share another project with you also in Southern California. Now, this one's a little bit different. It's an existing facility, not an IPD project by contract. It's a hospital built in 1950. You know, in California, we have something called earthquakes. It doesn't get cold, but the earth moves, just lets us know, like, hey, we don't like you all that much. You can't have all the great things in life. So we have to upgrade older facilities, because back then we didn't take this in consideration, to accommodate potential movement from the earth. So what that means, and I'm going to isolate to one photo here, is that we had to stiffen the existing concrete columns all about this building. Now, the building top right, all these little white lines, those are concrete buildings. All those little black things, those are windows. And if you look inside those windows, there are patients. And that was the very case when we jumped on this project, meaning we are working on an existing facility while it was being operated, while they were using it, while there was someone next door to us. So we had to be very calculated in our plan. So we devised the phasing plan. When it was all said and done, we identified 42 phases in which we would leapfrog from one to the next. So what do we need to do for the seismic enhancement? Well, we simplified it right here. You start with the demolition, you remove the windows, you strip the column, you gift wrap it with carbon fiber, you put the windows back in, you plaster those columns back up so you didn't see it, you don't see the carbon fiber, and then you paint. Doesn't even look like we were in there when we were said and done. Seems fairly simple, right? Straightforward, not that complicated. We thought the same thing, except 2 phases into it, while we were supposed to be marking at 17 days per phase, we were actually trending at 21 days per phase. Now, 4 days isn't that crazy, but 4 days over 42 phases, that adds up pretty quickly, both as it pertains to schedule and costs and goodwill. No one's happy then, not the owner, not us, because they're not happy, they're breathing on our neck. Things can't be planned within the existing facility. Nobody's happy. Not a great working environment. So again, time out. Let's huddle. Let's look at this. We looked at where the problem was, and we identified the problem seemed to exist within plaster, plaster being our critical path, and more specifically, the framing activity necessary to install the lath and finish plaster. So then we challenged ourselves to improve. And how do we do that? We didn't just start kicking around ideas. We went to the source of the problem. We went ahead and we threw a camera in the corner of the room and we said, now do it again. Okay? We're going to see what you're doing. And we didn't interfere. We didn't offer any suggestions in the time. We quite literally stuck that camera in the corner of the room and stepped out. And we let it play. And this is what we saw. We saw that the activity in question took about 45 minutes. Within that 45 minutes, only 31% of it was value. Do you guys know what I mean by value?
We gave a great definition.
Let me remind you, value is tool time, installation, anything that lies and remains in the final product, okay? Now, on the contrary, you have waste. It's anything that doesn't add to the final product. Maybe it's waiting, maybe it's playing on your phone, maybe it's taking a phone call while you're supposed to be working. That's all waste. It doesn't add to the end product, right? But it certainly adds to the schedule and adds to the cost. And lastly, necessary non-value, not as clear. These are things that are necessary, but they don't remain in place. So for example, you have to pre-drill concrete before you put an anchor in it. Well, no one wants the hole in the concrete, but they want the anchor in it. So the anchor being the action of value, the pre-drilling of the hole, necessary non-value. It's a necessary step to get to said value. So within that activity, 43% of it was necessary non-value, and 26% of it was waste. So then we took the video back to the room, and we modeled the process to understand it better. And this is how we have it simplified. After we installed the windows, we had to pre-drill the concrete for the concrete anchors. We had to drill the aluminum channels to receive the screws that go into the concrete, and then we installed the channels. We sat in a room full of foremen, not the foreman for just drywall. We invited the window installer, the electrician, the plumbing installer, the flooring guy, my paint guy, and we watched the video. We looked at this modeled sequence, and we said, do you have any ideas? Do you guys have any ideas? You know what, let's take some time. Let's take 1 minute, 2 minutes, each of the tables. Just look at this basic sequence, brainstorm some ideas, and come up with something. I would like to hear one idea from each of the 5 tables, okay? So let's do 1 minute. Can we do 1 minute? Talk to your neighbors, guys. Talk to your neighbors.
5 minutes left.
Yeah.
Remember that it's okay to take, you started already.
We're pretty good. I need about. Anybody who was with us yesterday, you be quiet. All right, guess what, guys? We're in the construction world. Things changed. I just accelerated your schedule. I need an answer from each of the 5 tables. Table 1, what do we got? What's your suggestion?
We'll bring the task closer
That's good. Okay. What does that do? Reduces travel time, moving, right? Okay. Table 2, what do you got? What do you got?
I think you produce all the things and elements on the factory.
Okay, so prefab it. Okay, not bad. Table 3?
The same.
Same, okay. Table 4?
Start pre-drilling earlier at the same time as installing.
Pre-drilling earlier, okay. Table 5?
Same pre-drill.
Okay. So all great ideas. Let me show you some of the challenges. In that photo, you saw, or maybe you didn't see, we are working within a 12 by 12 space. Not much room to get more than 2 guys in the room, which means we probably couldn't get other guys to pre-drill under someone installing a window. But great idea. If we could do it, we would. Prefab, great idea, right? I also mentioned it's an existing facility. And when you're pre-drilling for concrete screws, in California, rebar is a sacred cow. You do not touch it, right? We have no idea 50 years ago, 75 years ago, how they set their rebar, and it's way too costly to provide a scan of the entire perimeter of the building. So what I mean by that is maybe your screw distance is 12 inches, maybe it's 13 inches. So in order to prefab, you would effectively have to go through the entire building and spot on identify those variances and prefab to that. Might get costly, no? Well, we took it to the field, we asked some questions. Here's the idea that I came up with. What if we just didn't drill the channels? What if we didn't make that a separate task? What if we identified where the rebar was, and at the same time we are pre-drilling the concrete, we put the channels on top of it, drilled through the channels into the concrete. So what does that do? 2 birds, 1 stone, reduces the movement, because now you're not double handling the aluminum, and it saves some time. Or so we thought. So then we put it to test, okay? We did a second study, which this time took 26 minutes. We improved our value to 80%. We reduced waste to 5%. We reduced necessary non-value to 15%. When it was all said and done, we saved 19 minutes. Mic drop. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, right? Not impressed, right? No. What's 19 minutes? Who cares about 19 minutes? Well, let me elaborate. It's 19 minutes per window. It's 24 windows per phase. So that's about 8 hours. That's 1 day per phase, right? We had 40 remaining phases. 56 calendar days, I think it is. Okay. Opportunity cost is about $3,600 per bed per day over 56 days. That's 43,000. That's $2.4 million. 19 minutes, $2.4 million. For 19 minutes. All because we identified a problem when it presented. We got some information from everybody on the team, and we initiated an improvement. Now, here's the crazy thing. Do you guys know who came up with this? It wasn't the drywaller. It wasn't the framer. It wasn't the electrician. It wasn't the plumber. It was the window installer. Because on his system, he had to drill 2 holes and 2 brackets and similarly anchor into the concrete. And he says, well, why don't you just do it the way we're doing? Well, we would never have known that if we didn't stimulate that conversation. We didn't have the opportunity to be working in together to see in parallel. So by bringing everybody together, we increased our mind power, we increased our brain power.
I have a small question here.
Sure.
If we say that you had this 46 minutes in your budget, what would you have done then?
What's that?
If you had this 46 minutes in your budget,
Yeah.
what would you have done then? Then you want time, then you want schedule, then you want budget. You would never have found this saving.
Yeah, it's true, because we're never really looking for the problem. Typically, we're responding to the problems. We certainly wouldn't have stimulated this conversation, I don't believe. Not if there wasn't a carrot luring us. And in this instance, this was a traditional project. So there was no enhanced bonus to chase after. So maybe we do nothing. Maybe the problem presents differently. Maybe someone wants to get in earlier and they make the suggestion to help the overall process. But it's a great question, right? I mean, do you go looking for problems? Not all the time. That's what innovation is. And That's a rare breed, especially in the construction world. So in each of my two examples, I've illustrated each of the four enablers. But more so illustrate each of the four enablers, we illustrated how they complement each other, how one leverages, supports the other, and how as a whole it benefits the overall project team. Now, I didn't do any crazy BIM models, right? Again, that's, you guys show me the BIM models. You guys do it better than me. But what we did do in this last instance is we simulated a sequence, a process, visually, and we modeled the process, hopefully to understand its improvements. We saw something, we implemented it, and it worked out to our advantage. Now, what does this look like? Well, these are the seeds. These are the foundation of virtual design and construction. Now, what I want to really convey to you guys is that this is scalable. The examples that I'm showing you are fairly rudimentary, but they've got the complexity of the behavior that supports this process. Now, you compound that behavior and you compound your abilities with technology. Can you imagine the places you can go? You've seen some of the photos that Dean was sharing. Those hospitals, that's a very complex system to model. It's also a great system to just extract information and use it to measure value, to support production management, to monitor it while you're co-located, and if there is an issue, use the visuals to understand and experiment. Now lastly, I want to touch on the agreement. Now when I say agreement, you might immediately jump to the contract, and that's true. The contract is certainly an enabler of this overall process because it, by black and white, puts the team in alignment, but that doesn't change the behavior, and that's really what I want to focus on. You know, and I want to leave you just with one thing. Share your stories. Talk to your neighbors openly, honestly. Leverage these two activities, these two practices, to change our overall picture together. That's all I got, guys. Thank you.